My name is Michael Turner. I'm 52 years old, and today I'm going to tell you how my own father decided that a housewarming party was more important than the day of my wedding. While I stood waiting at the altar, he was raising a glass to the success of his golden child. But what he didn't know, and what she never even suspected, was that that toast would be the last one they would ever make with my money and under the roof that I had quietly provided for them myself. I'm not here to ask for sympathy. I'm not that kind of man. I'm here to show you what happens when you mistake a son's kindness for weakness. That day, while the music at my wedding played and my seat of honor remained empty, I made a decision. There were no arguments, no scenes at the reception, just a 30-second phone call that changed their lives forever. Sometimes, blood doesn't make you family. It only makes you an easy target if you decide to bite the hand that feeds you. My father believed he could humiliate me and that I, as always, would lower my head out of respect for his age. He was wrong. He forgot that I'm the one who manages the accounts, who signs the checks, and who knows every dirty secret behind his facade of a perfect family man. Betrayal has a price, and theirs was higher than they ever imagined they would have to pay. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, make sure to like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. For decades, I was the invisible son, the one who solved problems quietly while my younger sister, Victoria, was treated like some kind of deity on earth. She's 10 years younger than me, the golden child who was born when my father was already financially successful, or at least that's what he believed. My father has always been a man of appearances, someone who valued a spotless last name more than an honest heart. I grew up in his shadow, working twice as hard to receive half the recognition. I became an accountant, then a financial consultant, and eventually the owner of my own firm. I did everything on my own while he funded Victoria's whims, her trips, the cars she kept crashing, and her endless business ventures that never produced a single dollar of profit. My relationship with my father was always a one-way transaction. He called me when the bank sent foreclosure notices or when Victoria needed a guarantee. I paid. I did it out of a misplaced sense of duty, out of that old belief that family comes first. He'd pat me on the shoulder, call me a good son, and 10 minutes later he'd be on the phone bragging to his friends about how brilliant and successful his daughter was. To him, I was a tool. To her, she was his legacy. 3 years ago, my father's health began to decline, along with his finances. That's when I took full control of his assets to keep him from ending up on the street because of Victoria's poor decisions. I bought his house through one of my holding companies so he could live there debt-free, and I put Victoria on a fictitious payroll in my firm so she'd have a steady income, just to keep her from constantly bothering me. They never knew. They believed the money was still flowing by magic, or because of the good instincts my father claimed to have for investments. I allowed that fantasy. I stayed in the background, watching them celebrate their small victories with my effort, hoping that one day, just once, I might be the priority. Then I met Emily. She's the woman who brought order to my chaos, someone who wanted nothing from my money and saw me for who I truly am. When we decided to get married, I thought it was the perfect opportunity for my father to finally act like one. I didn't ask him for money. I didn't ask him to organize anything. I just asked him to be there, to walk beside me and take the place that belonged to him as my father. He agreed with a stiff smile, the kind he uses when he's thinking about something else entirely. 3 months before the wedding, Victoria announced that she was finally moving into a luxury property that, according to her, she had bought with her savings. In reality, it was an apartment I had purchased as an investment, one she managed to gain temporary use of through emotional manipulation of my father. She decided her housewarming party had to be on the exact same day as my wedding. "It's the only day my decorator is available, Michael, you have to understand," she said in that spoiled tone that turns my stomach. I went to see my father. He was sitting in his leather chair, the same one I paid for. I told him I couldn't allow her to do that it was a complete lack of respect. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Son, your wedding is a formal, boring event. Victoria is starting something new. She needs support. Besides, you're already a grown man." "She still needs us." His words pierced like needles of ice. I realized that to him my happiness was an obligation fulfilled, while Victoria's whim was a sacred mission. In the weeks that followed, silence took over our communication. I kept paying the bills, kept maintaining their lifestyle, but I felt like a stranger funding the celebration of my own enemies. My father stopped answering my calls about suit details. Victoria posted photos on social media of her party preparations, with captions like "My achievements" and "Family united." In none of those pictures did I appear. It was as if I had been erased from the family narrative long before the wedding even began. I arrived at the day of the ceremony with a strange calm. I looked in the mirror, adjusted my tie, and felt the weight of loneliness, but also the clarity that only absolute disappointment can bring. I knew they wouldn't come. My assistant informed me that the car I sent for my father returned empty. He told the driver he was too tired for a wedding, but to save his energy for the evening, for his daughter's party. There I was, a 52-year-old man, successful, respected by my peers, still waiting for affection that would never come. My father chose to admire freshly painted walls bought with my money instead of watching his son begin a new life. In that moment, the sadness evaporated and was replaced by a cold metallic resolve. The balance had been broken forever. If they wanted to live in their fantasy world where Victoria was the star and I was the invisible bank, that was fine. But banks close when accounts fall into default, and their debt had just become impossible to repay. The church was dimly lit when Emily walked in. She looked radiant, but as she reached my side, her eyes searched the front row. It was empty. There was no sign of my father. A murmur spread through the guests. Everyone knew who was supposed to be sitting there. I felt a pressure in my chest, not pain, but a humiliation that was turning into an icy certainty. I stood tall, jaw clenched, answering my vows with a voice that didn't tremble, even though inside something was breaking for good. As the guests made their way to the reception, I stayed behind for a moment in the foyer. I pulled out my phone. On social media, Victoria had just posted a story. There he was, my father, holding a glass of champagne, laughing loudly on the terrace of the apartment I was paying for. The caption read, "Celebrating the success of the best family in the world. Only the ones who matter are here." My father had his arm around her, wearing an expression of pride he had never once shown me. Not a text message, not a call to say, "I'm sorry." They had simply erased me. That night, during the toast at my wedding, I stood up. The guests expected an emotional speech about love and the future. I looked at Emily, who squeezed my hand tightly, giving me the support my own blood had denied me. "Today is a day of beginnings," I said, looking toward the camera recording the event. "But it's also a day of endings. I've learned that loyalty can't be bought, and that respect isn't something you're entitled to just because you share a last name." The guests exchanged confused looks at the tone of my words, but I remained composed. At 10 that night, while they continued celebrating, I stepped away for a moment into a private office at the venue. I opened my laptop. My mind was working with the precision of a Swiss watch. I logged into the management system for my properties and companies. There was no explosive anger, no pounding on the desk. My movements were slow and deliberate. First, I cancelled the corporate credit card Victoria used for her business expenses, the same card she was probably using to pay for the catering and drinks at her party at that very moment. Then I drafted 3 emails. The first went to the building manager where she lived, informing him that the occupancy agreement was terminated immediately and that the property would be listed for sale within 48 hours. The second went to my attorney, with clear instructions to begin eviction proceedings for my father's house. Legally, the property was owned by my company, and he had no active lease. The third email was the hardest to write, but the most necessary. It revoked the trust that covered my father's luxury medical expenses and his life insurance policy. If he wanted to keep living like a king at my expense, he would have to find a new benefactor. I closed the laptop with a sharp click. In that moment, I felt a tremendous weight lift from my shoulders. The symbolic expulsion had already happened. They cast me out of their family the moment they decided a party was more important than my wedding. Now, I was simply formalizing that separation in the real world. Around 11 that night, my phone began to vibrate. It was Victoria. I didn't answer. Then my father called, 3 times in a row. I imagine that was the moment they tried to pay the bill for the party services, and the card was declined. Or maybe they received the automated notification from the apartment security system informing them that access would be restricted at midnight. I didn't feel pleasure, only a deep sense of justice. For years I allowed them to believe they were superior to me, that my only purpose was to serve them. That night, as I danced with my wife, I realized they were nothing more than parasites who had lost their host. They left me alone at the altar, and now I was leaving them alone in their own arrogance. Betrayal is paid back in the same currency, the complete absence of the one who was once willing to give everything. The morning after my wedding, there was no hangover and no laziness. I woke up at 6 in the morning with absolute mental clarity. Emily was sleeping beside me, and for the first time in my life I felt that my home wasn't made of concrete walls, but of the loyalty of someone who truly chose to be with me. While she rested, I sat at the small table in the corner, opened my planner, and began outlining the architecture of their downfall. My response wasn't going to be an act of vandalism or a public scandal on social media. It was going to be a lesson in mathematics. My father and Victoria lived inside a glass structure, supported by my foundations. All I had to do was remove the foundation and let gravity do the rest. I called my trusted attorney, Daniel Brooks, a man who understands that in business and in family, emotions are obstacles to efficiency. "Michael, are you sure about this? He's your father," Daniel said on the other end of the line. "Daniel," I replied flatly, "my father stopped existing yesterday at 4 in the afternoon when he didn't walk through the doors of that church. What remains now is a delinquent occupant and an emotional fraud." The plan was surgical. First, the audit. For years, Victoria had inflated invoices from her supposed ventures that my company paid under consulting fees. I had proof that the money was diverted to her trips and jewelry. I wasn't going to report her to the authorities, not yet. I would use that leverage to ensure she signed over the apartment without legal resistance. Second, my father's house. Legally, the property belonged to one of my holding companies. He had only a verbal right of use that I had honored out of filial courtesy. But maintenance, taxes, and household staff were paid from my personal accounts. I ordered all domestic services suspended immediately. The electricity, water, and internet were in my name. If they wanted to live there, they would have to learn what it meant to pay for their own existence. Throughout that week, patience became my greatest ally. My phone was a battlefield of unread messages. Victoria shifted from outrage. "Michael, you embarrassed me in front of my friends when the card was declined," to hypocritical pleas. "Dad is very unwell. How can you be so cold?" I didn't respond to a single one. A smart man knows that when the enemy is shouting, it's because they're losing control. Meanwhile, I remained silent, moving the pieces on the board. I met with a high-end real estate agent and gave a clear instruction. "I want Victoria's apartment on the market tomorrow. Price it 10% below market value to ensure a quick sale. I don't want her to have time to dig in." The agent looked surprised, but my expression left no room for questions. At the same time, I began rebuilding my own life. I had spent so long maintaining my father's illusion of success that I had neglected my own long-term investments. I decided that the money recovered from those properties would be reinvested into a private fund for the future of my new family with Emily. I was pruning the dry, rotten branches of my family tree so new ones could grow strong. Midweek, I received a call from my father's primary physician. The old man was having anxiety attacks due to financial stress. The doctor, an old acquaintance, suggested I come see him. "Tell me, doctor," I asked coldly, "is financial stress cured by the presence of a son he chose to ignore on the most important day of his life? Or is it cured with the money he believes he can continue taking from me?" There was a long silence on the line. The doctor had no answer. I hung up. Patience is a form of power. I sat in my office watching Daniel's reports come in. Victoria had received the eviction notice. My father had received notification that his health policies had been cancelled due to non-payment by the policyholder. They were beginning to feel the cold of the real world, the world I had shielded them from for decades. There was no hatred in my actions. That's what they never understood. Hatred requires emotional energy, and I had no intention of spending another ounce on them. This was simply a life audit. The balance sheet of our relationship was deep in the red, and it was time to liquidate the partnership. I was setting the stage for the final act, watching from a distance as their fragile empire of appearances crumbled, waiting for the exact moment to deliver the final move, the one that would remind them for the rest of their lives that the invisible sun had always been the one holding the roof over their heads. The moment of climax didn't come with an explosion, but with the dull sound of reality collapsing. 10 days after my wedding, I decided it was time to face the ruins. I arrived at Victoria's apartment exactly at 2 in the afternoon. The moving truck I had personally arranged was already outside. When I walked in, the place that once exuded false elegance now smelled of desperation. Victoria stood there, her hair disheveled and her eyes swollen from crying, surrounded by half-packed boxes. My father sat on a kitchen stool looking 10 years older than I remembered. "You're a monster, Michael," Victoria shouted as soon as she saw me. "How could you do this to us? This is my home." I walked to the counter, placed the new owner's keys on the marble, and looked at her steadily. My face showed no trace of emotion. "No, Victoria. It was never your home. It was a loan I chose to revoke the moment you were toasting with my money while I was getting married alone. Now you have 1 hour to finish packing before the new owners arrive with the police." My father stood up, trying to recover an authority he no longer possessed. He approached me, slightly unsteady, and tried to place a hand on my shoulder. I stepped back before he could touch me. His gesture froze in the air. "Son, please, we made a mistake, I admit it. But we're your family. You can't leave us on the street. What will people say?" "People?" I asked with a bitter smile. "People will say that a man your age should have saved instead of spending his son's money on the whims of a daughter who does nothing but pose for pictures. And as for family, you defined what we are when you didn't show up at the church. You drew the line. I'm simply making it permanent." I sacrificed decades of silence for this moment of clarity. I pulled an envelope from my jacket and handed it to my father. Inside wasn't a check, but a detailed statement of everything I had spent on them over the last 5 years. The number was obscene. Victoria tried to snatch the paper, but he kept staring at the total in horror. "That's the cost of my loyalty, Father. It's already been paid. I've sold your house as well. You have until Friday to remove your belongings. I've rented a small 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts, a modest place, consistent with the income you actually generate. 0. The rent is paid for 3 months. After that, you're on your own." Victoria began to hyperventilate, hurling insults, saying she would sue me, that she would tell everyone her brother was heartless. "Go ahead," I said as I walked toward the door. "But remember, all those photos from your housewarming party are online. It will be hard to explain to a judge how such a successful woman can't even afford her moving expenses. And you, Father, I hope Victoria's party was truly wonderful. Because it was the most expensive party of your life. It cost you your home, your security, and the son who was always there to lift you up." I paused at the doorway and looked back one last time. I saw my father slumped on the stool, finally realizing that the strings I controlled were the only thing keeping him afloat. I saw Victoria kicking a cardboard box in a useless tantrum. They were 2 strangers who happened to share my DNA, nothing more. I didn't feel the pleasure of a movie villain. I felt the technical satisfaction of an accountant who had finally balanced an account that had been in the red for far too long. I walked down to the parking garage, got into my car, and closed the door. The silence was absolute. There were no calls of reconciliation, no tears of regret on my part. I started the engine and drove away from that building without looking in the rearview mirror. Moral justice is cold, it's harsh, but it's the only way to clear the path for what truly matters. The climax wasn't seeing them suffer. It was seeing them for what they truly were for the first time in 52 years. Nothing. 6 months have passed since that day. My life now unfolds in a peace I never knew, a calm that only comes when you finally stop carrying the weight of people who would never do the same for you. I cut all ties. I changed my number, sold the remaining properties, and made sure my circle was impenetrable. Emily and I are building something real, grounded in respect rather than financial usefulness. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Victoria had to sell her jewelry and designer bags to afford the deposit on a much smaller apartment. Apparently, her friends from the housewarming party disappeared the moment the free champagne stopped flowing. My father now lives with her, complaining bitterly about the lack of comforts, both of them trapped in a cycle of mutual resentment. It's ironic. Now that they only have each other, they realize neither of them has anything of real value to offer. Many people ask me if I regret it, if resentment eats away at me from the inside. My answer is always the same. It's not resentment, it's order. People confuse forgiveness with the obligation to remain a doormat for others to wipe their feet on. I forgave the fact that they never loved me the way I loved them, but I did not accept the disrespect. My father made his decision on the day of my wedding. He chose a facade over reality, and my only action was to let him live within the reality of that facade. There are no happy endings filled with hugs and tearful redemption. In real life, people who betray you like that rarely change. They only regret losing access to your benefits. I don't seek their apology because I know it wouldn't be genuine. All that matters is that now, when I look at my seat of honor at dinners with my wife and my true friends, no one who doesn't deserve it is sitting there. I've learned that blood gives you relatives, but loyalty gives you family. If someone decides your most important moment isn't worth their time, then that person isn't worth your future. It took me 52 years to understand that it was never my responsibility to save people who were perfectly happy watching me sink while they stayed afloat. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect its debts. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories.